person that I am, if somebody came to me with a problem, I wouldn't say, oh, I'm sorry, this is not clinical. If we didn't have toilet paper, I would go and buy toilet paper. If our autoclave machine was broken, I would drive to the depot and knock on someone's door until they gave me a new autoclave machine. And at the time, it felt great because I was fixing, this is something I can fix. I can go and buy toilet paper. Not realizing I needed to pace myself and needed to follow the process because there are reasons why these things are in place. And so I kept trying to fix every little thing. And I remember climbing up onto the generator to check the diesel levels. One day my husband said, why are you on call to check diesel levels? I said, no, this is fine. I can do this. This is part of the thing. But I didn't realize doing all these little things. It's not that I didn't have to do it. It was about the fact that I should have focused on what I needed to do, what was in my locus of control, and pace myself, that I think led to the issues of burnout later on.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Maria Christodoulou, and this is the Awakening Doctor podcast, a space where we discover the personal stories of those who work in the medical and health professions. Join me as I explore the hopes, the fears, the aspirations, and the real-life challenges of those who carry the title, responsibility, and privilege of being a doctor. So my guest today is Dr. Sheron Forgus, specialist family physician with many years of experience in the South African public health system. Sheron has a particular interest in community-oriented primary care and chronic disease management. And having experienced severe burnout herself, she's passionate about mentoring other medical professionals to navigate the demands of the health system more skillfully. Sheron's very graciously agreed to share some of her story with us today. So thank you, Sheron, and welcome.
Thank you.
Also in the room with us is Amy Kay, writer and narrative coach, and the producer and editor of the Awakening Doctor podcast. Where do we begin to tell the story of Dr. Sheron Forgus?
Sure. I think it dates back to standard 6 or grade 8 teacher asking you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you say doctor because that's what people have been filling your head with ever since you started getting high grades. And then the teacher nods and very encouragingly goes, yes, yes. And then you think, okay, good answer. And that ideal gets pushed into your head pretty quickly with, I think, a lot of the pressures that I've been under and put myself under have dated back to the pleasing the teacher and the family.
But does that mean that going back you might have wanted to do something else?
Definitely wanted to teach. But I do think that we end up where we should end up. And so now I'm actually tutoring in the MEd program at Stellenbosch. So in a way also teaching. I probably would have gone nuts in a classroom full of kids. I think God knew that. But yes, I did want to do something else, which was completely shut down by my father.
So you've kind of answered the question of why medicine. Within medicine, why family medicine?
That was pretty easy because I enjoyed everything almost. Didn't find myself pushed into one specific thing. And then I found that I really enjoyed the emergency unit because I never knew what was coming through the door. But when I got married, had a good conversation with my head of emergency medicine then, who said, realistically, what was better for myself and my husband then, and if I wanted a family and the pressures. And then I started thinking that he was right. And because at that point I was newly married and wasn't really seeing my husband working shifts. In final year, I loved family medicine, unlike my colleagues. I mean, they were copying the assignments off of me and I was doing other people's things for family medicine because everybody thought it was touchy-feely. And I thought, we get marks for this? This is wonderful. This is all about who I am. How can I be graded and have an exam on this? I loved it. And so I thought, oh yeah, there was the family medicine thing again. And then also all the touchy-feely things. So kind of realized that, oh yes, this is the path I thought I was going to be on. Because if you go into my end of year book, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? I said I would be a family physician. So,
really?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it was destined rather than the teaching.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Everyone's asking you what you want to be. You've got the high marks. Everyone's almost assuming that medicine is a natural, always a given. What do you think that's about?
I think that would have to bring my colored family and background into it. So I was the first in my family, and by that I mean my father's side of the family, his sisters and his nieces and nephews, the first to go to university. And I actually think my mother's side as well, with all of the cousins. I think a big thing was financial security, status. but I think more the security of you wouldn't have to struggle. And you get caught up in that. You're like, yes. I remember telling myself, security. So I think as a teenager initially, and then by the time you get to med school, I think it's almost too late. Everybody in your class is caught up in this thing of I'm going to be a doctor, and everybody's walking around thinking almost better than anybody else, and nobody's discussing the real issues by the time you need to discuss them, which is actually, are we ready for what we're getting ourselves into?
Yeah. Do we have any idea?
Yeah.
My parents were also immigrants who hadn't been afforded the opportunity for education, and for them only one of the noble professions was on the list. But I also remember that when I watched my parents interact with other people, the doctor and the priest were the only two people that they got quite differential with. There was like this enormous amount of respect. Not the same for lawyers or accountants. And being raised in the Greek Orthodox Church, being a priest was not available to me. And I suspect that wanting power, so status was about having power. And I could see that the doctor had power, and I wanted that. You think you won't struggle. And yet my own journey has been quite a struggle, and I know yours has too.
Yeah.
Do you want to say more about the struggle?
So I think always wanting to fix everything has been the thing. And I don't remember having it as a child or a teenager or an adolescent, but I remember once I entered medicine, like you said, the power, the feeling of I want to change the world, I want to help the world. That idea that you have going into medicine, and then initially you feel like maybe you are, because the intern system is dependent upon interns and you work hard, so you feel like this is it, I'm doing it. And maybe you do have a successful resuscitation and feel like you save a life and feel on top of the world. But I think bit by bit, the longer you're in the system, the more you at it, the more you sort of chip away. I remember my husband telling me when I was an MO in the emergency unit that you're just going to work every day putting water on a fire that's never going out. And I felt so angry and so upset at him for saying it. How dare you say this? But knowing it was true and knowing he was right, but also refusing to accept it, because what would that mean for what I did every day if all I was doing was putting water on a fire that was never going out? And I think at the end of that period, I was already burnt out as a community service doctor. And my colleagues and I would dream about, just 6 more months and then we'll go overseas, because that's what everybody did, right? You got away, you went overseas and you found yourself, and I really did. I wasn't in a clinical post at all. I was in a research post, and we were doing vaccine trials, and I remember wishing somebody would have an anaphylaxis so I could use the resus machine, and then thinking, okay, clinical medicine, I really miss it and I really want to go back. So what did I do? I came back and I jumped back into the emergency unit for 2 years, and then thought, okay, well, long term, I wanted to specialize, so family medicine. But all along, the feeling of I'm making a difference, I'm changing. And I wasn't then in a management post, so all you did was complain when things didn't work out. You're like, oh, there's no staff management, oh, there's no equipment management, until I was in the management position. And I think that was when I was really tested, because even as a registrar, I was in the system, so there was those struggles, but I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the studying and the exams. And I think really when I got into the management position, did it reach a crux, because then I felt that the buck stopped with me, or it was my responsibility to take it higher. And if I could just write that email or get in a room with the right person, I could solve the problem, because surely you could see this is what we needed. But when it turned out after 5 years of that not being the case, it all fell apart for me.
And you were working in a community clinic at the time, right?
I worked in a 24-hour community health center in Delft, which is a very overcrowded, poverty-stricken, gangster-ridden community with a emergency unit of 24 hours. So it was a clinic, but it was quite a big facility. Yeah.
And you were the senior clinician there.
And I was the senior clinician there. The person that I am, if somebody came to me with a problem, I wouldn't say, oh, I'm sorry, this is not clinical. If we didn't have toilet paper, I would go and buy toilet paper. If our autoclave machine was broken, I would drive to the depot and knock on someone's door until they gave me a new autoclave machine. And at the time, it felt great because I was fixing. This is something I can fix. I can go and buy toilet paper. not realizing I needed to pace myself, I needed to follow the process because there are reasons why these things are in place. And so I kept trying to fix every little thing. And I remember climbing up onto the generator to check the diesel levels. One day my husband said, "Why are you on call to check diesel levels?" I said, no, this is fine. I can do this. This is part of the thing. But I didn't realize doing all these little things, it's not that I didn't have to do it. It was about the fact that I should have focused on what I needed to do, what was in my locus of control, and pace myself, that I think led to the issues of burnout later on.
When I listen to you, I think how amazing for someone like you to be working in the system, to have that initiative, to have that drive, to be willing to go the extra mile to make change. That's being a change agent, and that's not letting the system get you down, in the sense of seeing where you can make a difference and using your power to leverage that. What do you think it is about you specifically caused that to end up in burnout?
I think I didn't know about healthy boundaries. I didn't know that you could say no or put a boundary in place, I suppose, to protect yourself, to ensure longevity, to do it for the right reasons and not for the wrong reasons. Not to say no because I don't want to help you or because it's not good for me, but to say no to something because you're saying yes to something else. I wasn't aware that I could have done things differently, preserve my mental health and my time. I felt that I was being mean and I was closing myself off. And I think that's why I'm passionate now, because when I was guiding the new person into my post, I would say, "But you don't have to do that." And there were lots of those. "Oh, but do I have to do that?" No, I did. But also, I don't know, being me, how I would have done it differently. I suppose unless I had coaching very early on for specific things.
You and I met when you were, I think, newly in your post in Delft, and you had just come back from overseas. You had an 8-month-old baby, and you were already feeling really overwhelmed. And having then coached you many years later when you made the decision to leave the public health system, I often look back on those initial conversations and wonder if, when we talked about you leaving then, because you wanted to leave the system back then, and our conversations led to you staying. And I've often wondered, did I prolong it? Did I create a situation where you stayed in the system and burnt yourself out really badly, when actually even back then when we first met, part of you wanted to leave?
I don't think so. I also think back to that. And I always think you were right. It would have been an emotional decision. It wouldn't have been the right decision to leave way back then. If I look back on the journey now, and I remember you also telling me at the end when I was thinking of leaving and it was so painful and I was so tearful, and you said the tears mean that you had meaning, that it meant something. If you were leaving and you were just so happy to leave. And I think back to that a lot, especially at the time. And all I can think of is it was meaningful, the relationships. And that was what somebody asked me, I think last year, phoned to ask about that position that was again available. Should they apply? And one of the questions they asked me was, what was the best part about your job? Now, no one's ever asked that question about the place that I worked. But immediately I said the people, I said the relationships and the people. I felt like I had a family. And even my kids said it. They said, "You don't talk about your work people like you used to." And so that was a big thing. It was a family. So it had meaning.
You were already burnt out when we first met, and you were really emotional and you wanted to leave. And then through the course of our coaching conversations, something began to shift and your way of being in that position changed. What would you say that was? What made it different?
I think that initial year was hard for a lot of the usual reasons. There was a whole disciplinary issue, but after that year, and that was behind me, I think people had also grown to know who I was. That made things easier in that I'm a people's person. And once I could make those connections, and it became easier for me to connect with people and to understand that part of it, the human part of it, it became easier to go through the struggles. I think I remember you telling me, and I told you it's so hard every day to go to work and to see the poverty and the suffering. And then you told me, well, that's part of it, just to hold it, just to be that space and not to feel like you needed to fix everything every day. And so I remember just going into work saying, okay, just hold the space. That's just what it is, without judging or wanting to make it all better all the time.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things I also struggled with as a doctor. How do you not want to try and make everything better all the time? And often because you can see what might lead to something being better, it's really hard to just trust that some things are out of your hands and it's actually not your responsibility to make it better. I think I may have said this to you back then too. Whether you see 10 patients, 100 patients, 5,000 patients, there's still going to be a queue of patients at the door, and that's the reality of our public health system.
Because it's not how you trained. You trained to finish the box, right? Finish the pile.
Yeah. You were working at Delft through the COVID pandemic. What was that like?
Initially, for me, not that bad. I think it was a change because that was when I really started feeling different and the burnout started coming back. So initially COVID was change of everything. We had to close down a lot of our essential services and bring in new policies, change the way a clinic was functionally run, even from the entrance to the exit. We were all in this together, almost like this new problem that felt like initially tangible. This is what we do, this is how we do it, and that's all we do for now. I can only speak for my facility. I think initially we were very protected because we didn't run out of oxygen. We had sufficient supply to last the patients until they went to hospital. Almost sheltered from the death plague. And I think myself, because I wasn't on the floor. I was all over managing, but I didn't have to see each and every patient that came. But I think by the end of that first year, when they started talking about reopening services and you realize the depth of what had been kept at bay, that became a very difficult moment for everybody. I think I might have left before the cracks in my other staff started showing. Because if I listened to other people's stories that they were at the hospitals and how they had to hold phones up to patients' faces so that they could say goodbye to their loved ones, I think, we didn't really experience that in the primary care setting.
So what made you decide to leave?
I think there were external factors, which I was glad for because then I could almost put it on that. I could say, my father's terminally ill and I really need to spend time with him, which is what happened. I mean, he had been chronically ill for a while, but we could see the decline in his function. And this was 2020 and my eldest daughter was grade 1. I remember going to work during COVID and thinking, we just need to survive. We all just need to survive. And whether my grade 1 can read, it doesn't really matter. There's bigger problems in the world. But I think by end of September, October, I wasn't really buying that excuse anymore. I think everybody by then already, even though it had only been a few months in, was tired of COVID. But I think realizing that my daughter couldn't read and because she had been doing homeschool, which wasn't really working, with me being at work and my husband trying to work in between the kids and my mom trying to help out a little bit while still caring for my dad, that my family needed me.
And how do you feel about that decision now?
Good. I never regretted it. It was very hard to make, as you know, because you walked me through that step by step. I think there was so much happening at the time. I finished work Friday and the following Saturday my father passed away. And then my mother ended up in hospital with COVID. And it was only 2 months later that for the first night I went to bed thinking, what's happening at Delft? Who is in charge? Who's taking the phone calls? And almost having this panic attack and not being able to sleep. And I thought, thank goodness this didn't happen 2 months ago, that I had so much else to think about.
One of the reasons that you and I are having this conversation today is an article that you've written for the South African Family Practice Journal about your experience of burnout and recovery from burnout. And you shared that with me, and I must say, I read it. The story is just amazing. And in the story, you write that burnout and the death of your sense of purpose didn't happen in the space of just a year, that it was a poisonous potion you drank slowly, bit by bit, over the preceding 5 years, as you took on more than you could carry and tried to fix everything that was broken. Can you say more about that?
A lot of it is me. A lot of it is my personality. It's my approach to life. And I think if you don't know that there's somebody that can help you with it, if you don't realize that, yes, there's you and the person that you are, but that there's coaching, there's mentoring. And sometimes somebody just to say, it doesn't have to be like this, or it doesn't mean this. And I've had a conversation recently with somebody who said she's such a people pleaser. She finds herself even wanting to please her child's teacher. And I had to chuckle with that because I thought, that's me. you start to make it pathological. You start to think, I have to fix, I can't say no. And then I feel so bad about saying no, or about how I feel about being unable to manage all of this. Unless you start to normalize that and realize that that's how it is. And there are people that see things differently, that can do things differently. Things didn't have to be like that. And I see it in my daughter, who's 9 and so anxious about, I've got school tomorrow, I've got to do this tomorrow, I've got to do that. And I find myself telling her, just deep breaths, calm down, nothing you can do about that. What can you do now, tonight? You can have a cup of tea, have a bath, and get into bed. And telling it, it's okay. Mommy also felt like this. Ma and Pa didn't really talk about it. They just said I was a sensitive child. Maybe they didn't know, but Mommy knows a little bit more about it now, and that I can help you. So I think that's the message I want other people to know. There's help, and it doesn't have to mean therapy and drugs, but it can be mentoring, can be coaching, can be a different way of doing things. So the potion you drink doesn't have to be poisonous, or you don't have to see it as such. And sometimes it can be powerful, but it's about how to channel that.
I've had many coaching hours with doctors, and I remember a time when I looked back and I counted, and I think I'd had about 800 hours of one-on-one conversations with family physicians at the time. And almost all of you were working in the public sector, almost all of you were the only senior clinician in the facility you were working in. And one of the things that stood out was how common these struggles were. I'm listening to you sitting here saying, it was about me and my people pleasing and my tendency to do X, Y, Z, but then there were all these themes that kept recurring in the conversations. Things like the fear of making a mistake, the anxiety about whose responsibility it was to take care of XYZ, the difficulty managing complicated relationships, the difficulty with conflict resolution just generally, but that sort of almost I'm not good enough feeling that seemed to be endemic in the profession. And I recognize that in myself also. And I wonder, what is it about the culture of medicine or the world that we live in that makes us feel like it's our responsibility to fix everything, or that if we don't do something, there's going to be a problem, or someone's going to die? Because that's the other thing in our profession. If we make a mistake, someone's going to die. Why do we take that on? Because I think other people feel that way too. I mean, the first thing they do when something goes wrong medically, it's the doctors are to blame, the system is to blame.
Yeah, I think also the rescuer mentality, and I think we don't switch that off, not in our private lives and not even when we shouldn't. I remember having an intern who came to me with an issue, and in my mind there was an issue and it needed to be fixed, but that she didn't even come to me for that. I think she just wanted me to be aware, and I completely overstepped because I tried to, in my mind, I was trying to help her, and she was very angry because she said that I completely overstepped. The point is, I was rescuing when nobody had asked me to rescue, and I think that was a big learning experience for me. And I think that's what we do as doctors, whether that initial reason is great, I want to help, I want to make a difference, I want to save, but the first thing about rescuing is safety first. Call for help and make sure you are safe. But we don't often do that. We jump in without a buoy or a life jacket, and then we wonder why we pulled under. And that is, it's us, but it's, like you said, it's also society and the expectations placed upon us by the communities and the families.
I'm going to jump in. Something you said a while back, which is just sitting in my brain, so I have to ask the question. There was an instance where somebody asked you for help, and then your instinct was, I have to help because otherwise they'll think I'm mean. That's a very powerful thing to be saying about yourself. And my question is, where does that come from? Where does that belief come from that you're mean if you're not helping or fixing or saving? Because there's a big difference between I want to help people versus I'm mean if I don't, or I'm unkind. Where does that come from? Do you know?
No idea. No idea. I've had to learn that. And even now, as an adult with basic interactions, I often have to tell myself, I'm okay, you're okay. We go from the position that you are a nice person and you're going to understand if I say no. And I'm okay in that I don't have to prove myself to you just to be accepted. I find those are interactions that I have daily. I don't know where it comes from, why I have this desire to please, and if the feeling that if I don't, then I am seen in a negative light.
There's some element of social conditioning for women in particular that we're supposed to help, and we're supposed to care, and we're supposed to look after, and we're supposed to protect in different ways. And I think men have that protect sort of message in a very different way to women.
It's interesting that there's this insecurity. You're a doctor, you have all this power, it's amazing, you're helping so many people look up to you, you get respect instantly because you're a doctor, society sees you in this way, you're put on this pedestal, but there's this feeling of, but I have to do everything, I have to go also buy toilet paper, and is that just a female thing where if I don't do it, nobody else is going to, and then the world's going to burn. And I suppose that was the way that you were, I think, medically trained. The men were treated very differently to the women. That socialization, that masculine and feminine thing, it's very fascinating because all these female doctors where I'm going, wow, you're feeling those things too? I would never have guessed that. I would have never known that female doctors are having same thing as all other women are going, this exact same things. Because I think there's that misconception that, oh, they're doctors, so what do they have to worry about? All you get is respect from people. You're not lying in bed at night worrying about, well, actually, didn't know that. So it's fascinating.
I think the differences that we experience as men and women within the profession definitely has something to do with it. I know that I felt as a woman of color, I was treated differently. And I often used to ask myself in that first year, would I still be treated like that if I was a male? Often the answer was, no, I don't think I would. Maybe there was an element of I needed to prove myself in every way. And not only as a doctor in the workplace, but also outside of it, I need to show that I'm a good mother, that I'm a good wife, that I can handle it, that I can do it all. And then difficult to say when you are struggling. And I find that within my friend circle as well of women doctors with young families, it's hard for them to say, I'm struggling, I am not doing okay. Maybe work's fine, but home is another story. My friends saying afterwards that I don't want to be judged or I don't want to seem like I don't have it together.
Because you're a healer and because you are the one responsible for saving other people and holding space for other people who hold space for you. Other people just don't know what to do with that. So if you say I'm struggling or I'm burnt out or I'm breaking down, I can't save the doctor. The doctor's supposed to be saving me because there's just that assumption of you've got it all together. So don't come to me with your problems. I come to you with my problems. And everybody needs somebody to hold space for them.
Yeah, you raise a lot of interesting points, Amy, and you said something about going back and working in emergency medicine and having one of the consultants say to you, are you sure this is the best choice for you? You've got a young child, you're married, you don't have time for your husband. And I find myself wondering whether he would ever have had that conversation with a male colleague.
Probably not.
And then I also wonder, what year did you finish medical school?
2003.
Okay, so you were in medical school and you were at UCT, which is one of our more progressive political universities. This dilemma of race and gender, and how do you hold both in a system like that, where white males have the privilege? I still remember, and it's a cliche because many people talk about this, sitting in our first lecture and the doctor saying, look to your left, look to your right, only one of you is going to be here at the end. And making a comment about how women were taking up too many places and it was a waste because we were going to stay home and look after babies and we could have given the opportunity to a man who would work full-time as a doctor.
Nice.
Yeah.
Real encouraging.
And that was reiterated a number of times in my training, this idea that we were taking up space. My own father felt that it wasn't an ideal profession for a woman, and his first concern when I said that I was thinking of doing medicine was, but what about when you want to have a family one day? Like, how's that going to work? Because you won't be able to work full-time. There was the immediate assumption that I wouldn't work full-time if I wanted to have children. But it was interesting because, similar to your father, it wasn't so much his dream that I'd be a doctor, but when the possibility became available, there was some enormous pride in the idea that one of his children would be a doctor. And so my very strict parents, who normally would have kept me at home, allowed me to leave Port Elizabeth and come to university in the Western Cape because me being a doctor outweighed me being a woman and staying safe at home. So I do think we underestimate the extent to which gender plays a role. And what was it like as a coloured woman in the system?
As a student, I didn't think about it much at the time. Afterwards, with conversations being had that I think back to it, the favoritism or the nepotism, which was very subtle. And I think at the time I was just trying to cope through medical school. We're at Red Cross Hospital and it was myself. There were only 3 of us for tutorial, myself and my 2 male white colleagues, and it was cold and I had a jacket over my white coat so you couldn't see that I had my white coat on. I was standing in the ward and the registrar passed me by and I thought, oh, okay. And then the 2 students came on and he looked at them and said that let's start. And I thought, okay. And then I approached him. And then I realized he thought I was one of the parents of the kids. Then I took off my jacket and then you could see, okay, his eyes, okay, got the student card, got the white coat, fine. And I remember answering every question in that tutorial because I thought, I'm going to show him that I belong there. It was an honest mistake, but one that I really took to heart. And then through the years, you kind of make light of it, when you're busy with the patient the whole night. And then the nurses would find it hilarious because the patient would ask, when's the doctor coming? Because they didn't realize that the colored woman helping them the whole night was actually the doctor. And at one of the other hospitals, they would just say, send Dr. Richard, because Dr. Richard was the white male amongst a whole lot of us. And then he would just go and sort of say hi to the patient, look at a chart so that she'd know, okay, the doctor did come. And we kind of laugh about it, and that's how it was. But I remember also thinking that the patients called us sister and thinking that was a colored female thing, but then a foreign white doctor said, she also gets it. And then I realized, it's actually a female.
Wow.
Yeah, I also had that. And I remember a surgical intern, a woman, saying to me that she would come out of theatre, they'd be wheeling the trolley and the patient would start coming round and they would say to the porter who was pushing the trolley, how did the surgery go? So let's come back to you and your story. By the time you'd made the decision to leave, the burnout had been happening for some time. What was the recovery like?
Longer than I expected. As I wrote in my article that I thought 3 months was all I needed. And then I had 6 months. I was like, okay, just a few more months. And then after a year, I just started panicking. And I really just needed slow and steady. I really just needed days of simplicity. Sending my kids off to school, taking the dog for a walk, eventually giving myself permission to lie on the couch and watch Netflix. And I think in that slowness, I remember you telling me, the parasympathetic needs to know that it's okay to take over, that you don't have to do everything in sympathetic mode. And that's something I tell my patients now. Back to basics, eating healthy, getting sunshine, getting enough sleep gave me the space to heal. Then part of that healing was figuring out, what is my next step? Because I didn't feel like I was complete, that the story was complete. So that then became a source of anxiety because after a year I started panicking, thinking, I have to take something. And now I thought there's no way I ever wanted to see a patient again. And also feeling this, not guilt towards my father, but so my father's gone now and I'm not a doctor. What does that mean? And also knowing that I would be okay with it if that was the thing, but not really sure if that was. And then just wanting to take some steps to figure that out.
I remember a time when your creativity started to return and you started writing, you started music lessons. What do you think made that possible?
Having the time and the space, I think. There wasn't much else to worry about other than my kids. And I think a yearning in my soul for something else, to create something of beauty out of everything, to make some sense out of everything that had happened, just for the sake of joy, not for the sake of anything. I exercise because it's healthy and I need to move, or I cook because I need to prepare a meal because we need to have supper. No, it was creating something beautiful just for the joy of it. And that was an incredibly unique feeling and experience for me. But I think part of the healing, because I found that in my writing, there was a tribute to my father, which was needed to happen. Learning to play the piano, that was something for me because I'd always wanted to do it and always just put it off. Even within that struggle, there was something to be said for I was being true to myself. I was listening to that inner voice of doing something I always wanted to do. I remember a friend of mine's husband saying, but piano lessons are for kids. I thought, maybe some kids, but not all of us could do it. And feeling quite miffed that he said it. But then also just didn't really matter what he said. It was about, I knew why I was doing it and why I wanted to do it. And it just felt right.
What do you think made it difficult to have time for those kind of creative things as a doctor?
Time, because even now I find it difficult. We spend so much time being switched on personally that I need a lot of downtime. I need a lot of time where I'm just not really thinking about anything, whether that's resting or sleeping or reading. But I find it difficult to switch off. And then I think it's also about expectations because my husband can play the drums and it's just about that. Whereas if I'm learning to play, he's also learning the drums, but if I'm learning to play the piano, then there's those expectations and things I put on myself. And it's not relaxing when I'm practicing. As beautiful as is what it is. And when we are creative people, there's also expectations that come with that. And we do lose the joy, the pure joy in it. You also didn't do piano for
many years. I don't know what it is about the training. I guess it's just the demands of the undergrad training that there isn't time for those things. And of course, I was away from home, so my piano wasn't close by. Whereas as a teenager, the piano was my outlet for all my aggression and frustration and all my emotions. And my mother would say she knew what mood I was in based on how my music sounded on the piano. And she could hear when I shifted from being angry to sort of calming down. But it just felt like medicine was so all-consuming. There was so much to know, and there was always something you didn't know or still needed to study or still needed to learn. And then the hours. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I graduated and I was working as an intern and then as a medical officer, officially our work week was a 76-hour work week. We had 60 hours plus 16 hours overtime a week. And often it was much more than that. Start work in the morning, you'd work through the night, you'd go back into the wards the next day, and then you'd have to go to a clinic, and you'd only get home at 5 p.m. the following day, and you hadn't had any sleep, and so never mind time for a social life or to think about creativity.
And I think that also wasn't really part of growing up. It was put your head down and work and you'll get somewhere. It wasn't, oh well, now it's extramural time or sport time. So you don't really know about that till you get to varsity and you see other people who seem to know that being well-rounded is good for you, but that's not really how you were taught to function or to succeed. It was head down, work.
And I guess little recognition that time and space for those things actually supports the other work. Got time to be creative, you bring that to your medical practice too. But I guess it's also that age-old thing of valuing the professions and the work that happens in that kind of workplace versus the things that were designated feminine arts. And, the arts, the humanities, the creative pursuits were not given the same value, and were not, to this day, people will be told that they can't study art or music because they're not going to make a living from it.
Yes.
I read somewhere in something that you wrote about postgrad research, which was about vigilantism in Khayelitsha.
Yes.
Do you want to say more about that?
Wow, something I hadn't thought about for a long time. I think it was because working in the emergency unit, even before becoming a family physician, within the townships, and then seeing a lot of vigilantism and being very frustrated because part of me thought, just finish up the job already because you're making more work for everybody. And seeing that frustration echoed on my colleagues' faces and the nursing's faces without ever somebody really wanting to say it. But I remember realizing the impact not only on us as staff, but also on the community themselves, was that if we were busy seeing to this one patient for most of the night because their injuries were so severe and they required so much attention and resources, and got the impression the community didn't really obviously understand that those were resources that were now pulled to this exact same person that they didn't want in their society. And that had an impact on the other patients that night, and even resources in the broader hospital setting that would then go into saving this same person.
And who were the targets of the vigilantism at that time?
Often the petty thieves. It was often something like they stole a cell phone or they stole something from that shop. They probably were worse crimes, often petty thieves.
You were quoted as saying that your mantra is that not time nor ease of activity should drive you, but passion. Would you say that that's true for you today?
I think I want it to be true. I think I've had to learn to go with what makes sense on many levels for me rather than the thoughts or the intellectual plans. By that I mean at this point in my life, I don't know what the long game is. There is no 5-year plan or 10-year plan. There's no method. If I work at this practice for so many years, I'll get this or achieve that. For the first time in my life, I'm okay with that because I know that how I feel about what I do every day, whether it's with my goals or with my patients or the way that my day is structured, which is amazing because I have half the day for work and the other half for mostly my family, but also university work and other things. I think that is the passion right now in trying to combine that in a way that's endurable and enjoyable for us as a family.
So what is it that's driving you?
I want to say simplicity of my day, but I don't mean that my day isn't filled with things. I mean, I feel like I have control. I feel like I can do and play the different roles that I need to play within my day and my week. And I try to have a balanced life without it all spiraling out of control or feel like I'm gearing everything towards only one thing because there's not enough time or enough of me to go around.
I guess that's one of the challenges of working in the public health system, is that there's so much that is outside of your control and so much that can happen unexpectedly in any moment that you can't predict or can't preempt or prepare for. So often things feel out of control. So what would you say success means for you?
Sure. Now, I would say to just be sitting here talking to you about it and not cry. To be resilient, I think. To have been through whatever I went through and still be able to tell a story in a way that means I'm not ashamed by what happened and by what I've been through.
You told a beautiful story in your article about a patient who had quite a big impact on you.
I love that story. I was having good interactions with people and feeling a parts of myself that I hadn't felt before, because even as a family physician, I did have patient interaction, but I always felt that it was rushed or another thing I had to do. And I've got clinic today. That's another thing on my list. Actually, if you took the clinic away completely, patients that I had to see, I would still have a whole long to-do list. And this was just another slip in my day almost. That's what it actually ended up being. And then I was finding the joy again in seeing patients and just sitting with them. And then this patient walked in one day. I called him Mr. GG, those are his initials, and maybe something reminded him about my dad. He just was so eloquent and with his shiny shoes and his pullover, and he could just give me this perfect history. He was a patient in the state system, but who obviously had a little bit of financial reserve to be able to come to a private doctor for some checks now and then. And I remember asking about his feet, which were impeccable for diabetic, and him saying, yes, I went to see the podiatrist for my feet. And I thought, just lovely. And had a lovely chat and then sent him on his way. Not long after, 2-3 weeks later, he came there, didn't have an appointment, but that he wasn't looking well. And I came out to the waiting room and he was in a wheelchair and he's with his wife and he couldn't talk. Literally just had within the hour a stroke. And his wife said she couldn't make out anything that he was saying except my name. And put him on the bed, stabilized him, sent him off to hospital, and then tried a few days later to find out how he's doing, but his phone just rang. It didn't have a number for his wife. Another 2-3 weeks went by, tried a few times to call him, couldn't reach him. They were starting to fear the worst. And then there wasn't a next of kin noted for him. Started wondering if I shouldn't check out his address. But also remember feeling like, that's strange. What are you going to do with his address? Aren't you overstepping boundaries? There had been other patients in the last few months who had been sent to hospital. He didn't always know what happened to them. So what was it with this patient? And I didn't know. But one day I thought about it again, and I remember my mom-in-law was here, and I thought, okay, I don't have to immediately rush home to the kids, so let me just check out where this address is. And it was less than 1 kilometer away, and I couldn't believe it because I thought I would have probably convinced myself that it was too far, and it was late, it was already 6:30. I just found myself getting in my car and driving there, and that's not me. If I don't plan and phone ahead and think about every possible outcome, I don't usually do things. Something just felt right about it, and I found the house very easily and knocked on the door, and his wife answered and was so happy to see me, and went upstairs, and there was my patient in bed but sitting up and big smile on his face and able to talk, and I just remember thinking, okay, this is why I came, just to see him, and had a lovely little chat with him about what they had been through the last 2 weeks. And then I started thinking, what if they think this is a formal call and they start asking me things and I have to do an examination, and I had nothing with me, but there was none of that. They didn't ask me a single medical question. They didn't ask my advice. It was so mutual in our happiness to see each other that I think the fact that there wasn't an expectation made it just so much more beautiful. And left there thinking, wow, this is what it was always like for me in the beginning. That connection, sitting alongside him in his bed, not needing to fix it.
What do you think it is about that story that makes you emotional?
Because I thought it was about finding the patient, but it was actually about finding myself, finding part of myself. The old me. I think that a whole year I spent unknowingly trying to find out, is this it? Is this okay? Am I going to keep doing it? Do I want to keep doing it? Without really knowing. It's a job, you go to it, you do it every day. But I didn't know till then that I was actually still searching, still figuring out, still wanting the answer of, is it okay to be back? Is it okay to do it? Why are you doing it? And I remember feeling that day, or maybe even through writing the article, that, oh yes, this is what you were looking for.
This being?
The connection with the patient, the compassion, without the expectation and the burden. Because if he had said, oh, doctor, just listen here, I would have gone, oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't really want that. But the fact that he felt it too, just the happiness to see me again.
Well, for me, it's reminding me of what happened for me when I first started coaching. So this idea that I could be with someone who was struggling with something or suffering with something, but we could explore it together, and it wasn't my job to fix it. I could ask questions, I could be curious, I could be humane, I could be compassionate, but there was a freedom from that responsibility. And I still to this day think about that sense of responsibility for others. Partly it's an ethical thing, I mean, we take an oath, and partly if you go to the Health Professions Council of South Africa's website, that is our representative body, right, as medical people. And the first thing you see on the page is where to go if you have a complaint against a doctor. So the assumption is that the public need to be protected from us because somehow we are going to do harm. And it's a huge responsibility. I don't know about you, in social situations, people start asking me about health stuff. It's kind of inevitable. And often I have no clue. You know, they'll say, what do you think this is? Or do you know about this illness? And it feels embarrassing to say, sorry, I don't know. I've learned to say it, but I still feel I should know it. When I encounter it with my clients, I see either young students feeling intimidated in the presence of professors who seem to know everything, or vice versa, the professors who are now getting on a little bit and the younger generation is maybe more clued up about the newest stuff, and then they start feeling inadequate and they want to go back and refresh their knowledge about XYZ, and it's like, no, actually, right now you're a mentor. Your role is very different to what the younger graduates need to be knowing. And the reality, and maybe this is scary for the public to know, is that often we don't have answers. We don't know how to fix what's happening. And it feels like if I admit that, then I'm not a good doctor.
What I'm trying to do also going forward is, in addition to being more okay with saying that and doing that, is to also tell my patients that I don't know how to fix it. I don't have the answer for you, but I'm here for you, and I'm going to be here for you and walk this journey with you. And I felt that look on their face or their expression after that, not every patient, obviously, some really do want an answer, and if you don't have it, they're going to look elsewhere. But when you do have connection with the patient or a few meaningful discussions, sometimes what people want. But that honesty is scary, I think, for us and for the patient.
Exactly.
I think what touched me about that story, because I haven't experienced this very much in my own life, is just knowing that you cared. That's what all that mattered, was that you cared enough to worry about him, to go find the house, to go check up on him, that it was never going to be a professional thing that you were doing, just from a human to human, empathetic, I'm thinking about you, I want to check in on you, oh, you're okay. And that's incredibly rare in the medical field, whether you're going to a doctor or your dentist or your therapist a lot of the time, that feeling of, I'm just a number and you don't care. And even if I'm in the fetal position crying on the floor, when the hour is up, the hour is up and you get the hell out of here and see you at the same time next week. The amount of times I've experienced that in a safe therapeutic setting just makes you go, really? This is clearly all about money for you. And so that thing of just having another human and a doctor on top of that is so rare that you really actually cared about him and cared about his family. That's would have been enough, because who has a doctor come to the house and check up on you because they were thinking of you? Whether it's a friend or whether it's anybody. It's a rarity nowadays for somebody to actually care and to have no agenda about it. They weren't looking for anything. It was just you're in my heart. And that's what is so beautiful about it.
You're right. When you said it now, I realized that the human in me wanting to connect to the human in him, and especially after the year I had had before, just wanting to connect, and the fact that him and his wife had it back with me was the click that was needed all along. So you're right. Because it does come with, well, I'm going there in what capacity? I'm going there as Sheron, who's worried about my cute little patient, but he might see me as this role. I think he saw me. And I think that was what was missing, because they do walk into my room and immediately my first question is to myself, am I going to be able to help this person and solve this problem? Because that means I'm a good doctor. And then sometimes I'll think, okay, maybe if the connection is good, they won't focus on the fact that I didn't really give them a diagnosis. But that's what you want at the end of the day, right? You need to fill in the ICD-10 code, you need to bill, and it's all according to this diagnosis and packaging it up. But it's messy. And it's often the messy patients that I like, because they come in there and they're apologizing for their tears, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is my language. The minute things are messy, emotionally uncontrollable, I go into control, because I feel like I know this. Don't apologize. Maybe I'll start crying with you. In that way, this year has been good, because there's a lot of post-COVID angst and PTSD and anxiety that people haven't really spoken about, or you can only really speak about it if you've lost your job or your loved ones.
A lot of death angst that wasn't acknowledged before. I think it's always been there, but COVID highlighted how mortal we are to everybody. It wasn't just something that happened to old people or sick people, it happened to anybody. So for a lot of people, I think that confrontation with the reality that we die has been really hard to process. And as doctors, certainly for me, and years of working with cancer patients finally got me to the place of, okay, people die and it's out of my hands. Even if I do everything right, people still die. Damn, I'm not God. So what advice would you have for a young person who's being asked what they want to do and saying, doctor?
I can tell you that because I'm just going through it with my niece. It's find your why. And your why will probably change. Initially, your why might be I want to make money. But to stay true to your why, whatever that is. You can study medicine through whatever pitfall. I've seen people say they've studied without electricity, with a candlelight, because they either lived in a township too poor to have it, or their parents could not afford electricity. They've studied through not having student loans and worked on the side, but their why was always the reason they pushed through.
What's your why today?
I think stay true to myself.
I know that faith is something very important in your life. So do you think that's part of that, staying true to yourself?
I think I will end up where I'm meant to end up and do whatever was already predestined for me by God. But I think God loves us enough to let us have all the beautiful mess. How we navigate ourselves through that is up to us, which is incredible. I think that our Maker would allow that, but also freeing and scary at the same time. There's a purpose and a plan bigger than me is my belief. That it's not necessarily about me or my plans or how I plan my day. It really is about loving others and seeing others. And I think that's why we're here. And it's easy to forget that most days, right?
How do you think burnout fitted into that plan?
I needed to love myself. I needed to find myself. Not about the list. It's fine if you don't check everything off this week. Have you played with your kids? Have you really looked up you in the eye or G in the eye today and had a meaningful heart-to-heart? Did you talk to your mom today?
And what would you say is the most important thing you've learned about recovering from burnout?
That it can and will happen again. If I didn't read that in one of the books I read, I would have thought, oh, what happened? What went wrong? Why? Because I felt it happening again this year, and my husband says, at least you can identify it and it's happening.
One of the things I've learned and that I see in others is that often you only wake up to the fact that you're burnt out when it's quite late, when you're quite far in. But looking back, there may have been some signs along the way. If you think about your own journey, what was some of the signs along the way that could have been red flags for you?
I think the compassion fatigue was the thing I should have paid attention to. I didn't know why. I didn't know the term. Or maybe I'd forgotten the term. 2 months into COVID, somebody mentioned it. And I thought, that's what I'm feeling. And it felt so refreshing that there was a label for it. I started feeling completely flat with everybody. A friend having a little crisis and feeling like, no, I do not want to be having this conversation with you. And then the guilt of what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be there for her? So I wish I had paid attention. The biggest warning sign, because I was actually trying to cut myself off from many things, not knowing why.
I remember for myself, I would go to work in the morning and I would look at the appointment book, which was inevitably full at that time, and my heart would sink. Like I didn't want to see these people. I didn't care what was wrong with them, way before I had cared. What's fascinating is that I then thought, there's something wrong with me that I don't care, but not, there's something wrong with me, I need help. I'm a bad person because I don't care anymore.
Yes.
Which then makes it harder to ask for help. I should care. Worst advice you've ever been given?
Just be strong. If I hear somebody else saying that, I think, no, why? How does that help anybody? Not speaking up about it and just keeping quiet. Whereas now I think I'll say something about it.
So if I ask you now at this stage of the conversation, who is Dr. Sheron Forgus? What would you say?
I think take away the doctor. Just me, just figuring it all out like the rest of us.
What's next? What's emerging for you right now?
Still trying to get my book finished. Book being a novel. The working title is Rewrite the Stars. So my title is headed Rewrite of the Rewrite of Rewrite the Stars. But again, it's a process that I'm learning to be okay with. And I told my husband, this rewrite is not joyful. And I think that's part of the process of trying to be a writer. I always said if nobody reads it, it's fine.
I'm struck by how the time that, in a way, you described as a year of kind of lying on the couch wondering what you were going to do next, you started learning how to play the piano, you've written a novel. What seemed to be like a space of doing nothing was actually a really productive, creative space of you coming back to yourself and beginning to express other aspects of you.
And I think that there was no pressure. Even though initially with the piano I was going to write music exam 1, which I did, but also knowing that what if nothing happened? It's okay. It didn't really matter. Everybody was completely amazed that I had written anything and done anything. Because also I said, I went to gym. I didn't do much for the last year. No, actually you did. I find it difficult to advise people or support or mentor who are in a similar space, who can't necessarily take the time off that I did. I do understand that and I'm aware of that. But I do then think that it's again about finding the little whys within you, finding the little threads of gold, old parts of yourself. At the GP Refresher conference, doctor spoke about the fact that what did we have to cut off of ourselves to be where we are or to do what we do. There was quite a few eyes misting up in the room. Never thought about it like that. So I think people might need to reflect on what is it that they had to cut off of themselves. Was it piano because you didn't have the time? Was it a home visit because you always thought it had to come with your medical bag? Or is there a little thread of yourself you can find that you can maybe just pull on a bit to get a bit of your old self back?
I suspect that our humanity is one of the things we end up having to cut off to get through medical training. That would be my answer. And in fact, Amy asked me the other day what my years at medical school were about, and I said it was a death camp.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah, that's a conversation for another time. What are you going to take away from this conversation today?
That it felt good to talk about it in a controlled setting, because I think I have had conversations before, but I like the fact that there was a space created to reflect and about my journey. So that was lovely.
Great. Thank you so much, Sheron. It was lovely to chat with you.
Thank you so much.
I'm Dr. Maria Christodoulou, and you've been listening to the Awakening Doctor podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your friends. Follow Awakening Doctor on Instagram, Facebook, and Spotify, and go to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and give us a good review. Thank you so much for listening.